review. However, where a process is not being followed, it should be noted that there's a good chance it's not being followed because A. the process does not meet your objectives, B. the process does not offer any value, or C. just that no one actually knows the process exists. If you do come across processes that are not being followed during a TPR, then you probably have spotted an area for improvement. Getting specialist help or training for your reviewers will properly address this particular issue. If you have decided the time is right to undertake a TPR within your organisation, how do you navigate these pitfalls and deliver a successful TPR? I have documented the high-level process that I believe, given my experience, will help to navigate some of those pitfalls. Firstly, get buy-in from the stakeholders to do something with the results. It's not just about undertaking the TPR. Agree the business objectives, the test objectives and the TPR objectives so that everyone has a clear understanding of what you're trying to achieve. As well as agreeing objectives, you will need to agree scope and deliverables. There are other key considerations such as how are you going to collate the information you need? Will you use workshops, interviews or questionnaires? The likelihood is a combination of these approaches, but you know your organisation and you know what fits best. Make sure you either select or develop the right model for your organisation. This may take a little effort, but you then have a reusable tool that you can utilise every time you do a TPR. Involving the right people in the review is key, but remember, don't just use test resources. The business, development and other project resources will have valuable information. You need to keep everyone informed of the process and how they'll be impacted. A good way to do this is to hold a setting the scene meeting for all those involved. This is an opportunity to tell everyone of the objectives, the process and their deliverables, and most importantly, their part in the TPR. It is important that people involved don't feel the TPR is an audit and that any deviation from the process will be a black mark against them. You need the resources involved to talk openly and freely about what needs improving and what is done well. The output is especially important. It needs to deliver what has been agreed, but I personally feel it needs to do three key things. Firstly, you need to provide a picture of the current test position. This is your baseline for measuring the results of future TPRs against. Secondly, make sure recommendations made will help you achieve those business and test objectives set at the start of the process. Thirdly, in order to build the business case for investment, it is essential to understand the estimated ROI from the recommendations. This is not always easy to do, and at this stage are purely estimates. However, this tends to be essential in getting the budget for the TPI. Lastly, often the test process review results are not disseminated to all those involved in the TPR. The resources that have given their time, effort and sometimes outstanding ideas for improvement don't get the courtesy of seeing the results. This will not only discourage these resources from helping out in future, it is likely to make the implementation of changes more difficult. This is why it is essential to ensure that the people involved in the TPR receive a copy of the deliverables. But once you have buy-in from all, it's now time to move on to implementing TPI. Test process improvement is about implementing the agreed recommendations that have come out of the TPR. It is likely that not all changes recommended will be agreed. Sometimes people will just not agree with all your recommendations, even if they have been created taking into account the business and test objectives. Other times, budget and resource constraints will only allow the implementation of certain recommendations. That is why it is so important to define the estimated ROI as an output of the TPR, as this will help you to prioritise which improvements will provide you with the most benefit. A good TPI will use formal change management methods and techniques to successfully manage the proposed changes to testing. This will ensure that changes are implemented in a structured and controlled manner. A good TPI will also consider the supporting processes required. These are likely to include training, metrics to measure the actual ROI, and a method for ensuring maintenance and the improvement of these test processes going forward. But again, many TPI programs fail either during implementation or after implementation. Let's now look at some of the key reasons why this occurs. During implementation, one of the key pitfalls is a lack of buy-in by resources who will either be utilising the products of change or who are impacted by the changes. Change is never easy, but as with TPRs, getting the correct people involved in implementing the TPI will help generate buy-in and often enthusiasm for change. Often the potential benefits of change are not disseminated to all parties. The potential ROI may be known by the key stakeholders and budget holders, although in my experience this is not always the case. However, if no one else can see the potential benefits and the ROI of change, why should they welcome change with open arms? That is why it is important that TPR and the potential ROI is known and disseminated, not only to the stakeholders and budget holders, but to those impacted by the changes. The other reason why TPIs can sometimes be perceived as failing is that often there are no metrics to state otherwise, so even if you think your TPI has been a success, if there is no way to measure it, how can you prove it? This is why it is essential to put in place the right metrics prior to implementing any change. This will enable you to measure the success of the TPI. Additionally, change is often implemented in a haphazard fashion with no real ownership. However, someone somewhere needs to have overall responsibility for planning and managing the changes and measuring the success. Giving someone responsibility for the change and applying normal project management principles should resolve any issues with ownership. It is best to pilot any new initiatives or changes. This will do two key things. Firstly, it will iron out any issues associated with the changes, and importantly, it should allow you to derive some initial metrics to determine if you're on target with meeting the expected ROI. Many organisations fail to do this and suffer two major setbacks. Firstly, if there are too many issues for the new processes, people will stop using them and revert back to the old processes. And secondly, using the pilot approach will allow you to determine if the initial expected ROI is being met, and if not, are you really sure it's worth implementing it fully? Often when new processes are rolled out, they tend to offer a belt and braces approach to test. However, processes must offer some sort of flexibility. If tasks are just being done for the sake of it, then people will stop using them altogether. There does need to be some sort of risk assessment of the processes and on which occasions flexibility can be used. However, not only will this give you a fit-for-purpose test process, it will also ensure a lean and efficient test process for all projects within your organisation. Often there is not adequate support or training for the people impacted by the changes. New processes need to be documented and stored in a central, easily accessible repository, and where necessary, training made available. Although there are many TPIs that fail during implementation, my experience is that most fail post-implementation. It's not easy to get a long-term commitment or a budget for maintaining the test process, but a lack of ownership post-implementation has to be one of the single biggest failures. Without ownership, there is no one ensuring that process improvements are being picked up.